and dying in your beds many years from now, would you be willing to trade all the days from this day to that for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom?
And welcome to Anti-Tyranny News Radio here on UCY.TV. Thank you for joining me this evening. One thing that's really been debated is this whole between the Border Patrol and flying in these U.S. citizens that had Ebola into the United States, and many other issues about, all these diseases that are coming into the country right now. I believe some of it is hype, and I still believe, though, that this is being used. I honestly think that they're wanting a crisis. They want a major crisis. And here's one that came out of the Blaze, and it's titled, "I'm the head nurse at Emory. This is why we wanted to bring the Ebola patients to the U.S." It says here, the chief nurse at Emory University Hospital in Atlanta is speaking out about why the 2 American patients who contracted Ebola in Africa were brought back to the United States. Susan Mitchell Grant wrote an article for the Washington Post that Dr. Kent Brantley and Nancy Wright-Bull, who worked in Liberia with the mission Samaritan's Purse, were brought back for better treatment and other broader reasons that could the country and the world overall. These patients will benefit, not threaten, the country, Grant wrote in her post titled, "I'm the head nurse at Emory. This is why we want to bring Ebola patients back to U.S." Fears that some had with these 2 patients being brought back to the U.S. from West Africa, where an outbreak of the viral disease is raging, were unfounded and reflect a lack of knowledge about Ebola and our ability to safely manage and contain it, Grant said. She went on to explain how Emory University has a specialized unit for highly infectious patients, and staff is trained to deal with such conditions. Well, most hospital staffs are trained. Most graduates and doctors have some training in highly infectious diseases. So that's not really making me feel any better. Said, but beyond that, the public alarm overlooks a foundational mission of the U.S. medical system. The purpose of any hospital is to care for the ill and advance knowledge about human health, Grant wrote. Going forward, Grant wrote that Americans and others could benefit in the future from hospitals taking over treatment, thus allowing it to learn more about how to treat the virus, which does not have a vaccine or cure. I think this is why you don't introduce it into a populace before you have that vaccine and cure. You're saying, oh, we don't have a vaccine or cure, so let's, bring these people. Well, we've been trained. Well, yeah, those two people that were over there were also trained and in suits to prevent what they got. So, it doesn't make you feel too much better when you realize that. And I think it's arrogance and that overinflated ego. Just because you train for something doesn't mean it's always going to work the way you want it to when the situation actually happens. It might help out, it might increase your chances, but the training don't guarantee anything. And I think by bringing it in, that was arrogance. Oh, we can handle this. And then when it breaks out, oh, it's beyond what we thought it was. That's usually the type of answer you would hear. I think I had another one here. If I can find it. I'll repeat it in here. Make sure it goes. Okay. Maybe. Having a problem here. I'll just restart this. Make sure I get it. There we go. Finally, it's popping up now. This is out of InfoWars, but U.S. health authorities concealing number of suspected Ebola victims from public. And I want to kind of just play this here. It's a real quick clip.
Look at, because some of those symptoms, they seem fairly common, but tell us what the symptoms they're looking at right now in this particular patient.
Well, some of the early ones are quite common and can be confused with lots of other things. Fever, someone can develop abdominal pain. Sometimes they can develop a rash over certain parts of their body, red eyes. Eventually, all those symptoms sort of get worse. And Ebola, as you may know, Wolf, sometimes is characterized as well by bleeding problems. The blood just doesn't clot as well, and that's why patients may have bleeding. Some of it you may see actually be able to observe it. Some of that bleeding can actually occur on the inside of the body as well. But again, it's the definitive test is a test you were just talking about with Jason, actually doing a blood test and confirming the presence of the virus and some of the antibodies to the virus in the bloodstream.
So I missed the last part where you said, how long does the test take to determine whether or not someone actually has Ebola?
Well, it's interesting. When I was in Guinea, they were doing the test there in the field, and sometimes they could get the test results back the same day. In the United States, interestingly enough, a lot of times they draw the blood, they send it to a particular lab, and it can take a day or two usually to get the results back confirmed. So I would guess by tomorrow time we'll have a better idea. I should point out as well, Wolf, that the hospital has made this known. There have been about a half a dozen patients who have had their blood tested because of concern. Those particular patients, their stories were not made public. This patient was. I'm not sure if that's because of heightened concern by the hospital or what that means exactly. But again, we just can't say for sure until the final tests come back. And, they want to be sure on this. It takes about a day or so.
And this particular patient in New York, does the patient have that internal blood clotting problem? Do we know if it's gone to that level, or is it just high fever and some gastrointestinal problems?
My understanding is it was the two things, the fever and the gastrointestinal problems, but also most relevant was the recent travel to West Africa. That when you're sort of piecing this together, you're looking at the history of the patient in total. What are the symptoms the patient has, but also the travel history obviously becomes very important. So piecing those two things together, there was enough of a concern by the doctors and nurses who were taking care of him to go ahead, isolate the patient, get the test performed, and wait for those results to come back.
And we should get the results probably tomorrow, is that right?
I think so. My guess is tomorrow. If it may go into the next day as well, because they sometimes send these results out. One thing that I think is worth sort of putting a punctuation mark on is that he isn't going to be in isolation. But we've talked about this several times, Wolf. This isn't the kind of thing that they worry about spreading to other patients in the hospital, spreading to people who are walking around the hospital. This is not an airborne virus. This is something that spreads only when somebody is very sick and they start to actually shed the virus in their bodily fluids. So it's somebody who comes in contact with those bodily fluids who's not protected. So while we know the particular story with this patient, we don't know if in fact he has the Ebola infection. In terms of concern for the hospital population at large or the population around the hospital is still very minimal.
Very minimal indeed. And as I said, I don't want to overly alarm people in New York City. There have been at least that we know of 6 cases of individuals who have come to the United States from West Africa, from some of these countries, who have come down with some symptoms. All of them were tested, all of them negative for Ebola. So let's hope the same is the case right now.
But what you also hear is that they're not taking the extra precautions to make sure that it's not spread. Oh, they're not, in any harm. No one's in any harm. But at the same time, Ebola, this is out of Bloomberg, Ebola crisis spurs passenger checks as airlines still fly, saying that they are still going to fly people in and out of there, but now you're going to even have to go through more scrutiny than you already do. Which, okay, we're going to still fly in and out. I really think that you would definitely be taking your chance, but then I think I also seen something about I'm pretty sure I've seen something about students trapped. Give me a second here. I know I've seen something somewhere about, no, I can't find it. Okay, now I found it. This one was coming out of, WSFA.com, and I'm not sure exactly where they're out of. It's not telling me here, so I'm not quite sure. But it says here, the 6 Tuscany University students who are stranded in Liberia after flights to and from the Africa country became temporarily suspended due to Ebola outbreak fears will be returning home. So, there's a lot of concern, and does that mean that people shouldn't be able to come back? They have a right to come back to their home, but the problem I have with it is the way everything is being handled. And I think there's a lot of fear hyping for a reason, and I think maybe we can learn something from the H1N1. But does that mean that we also should be careless in what we do? If these these students tested and made sure and, isolated themselves and double tested and then go, okay, now we can fly back, I think that's a responsible way. That's what I would personally want to do. I would make sure that I would not be bringing something back. The last thing you want to do is infect loved ones with something that does not have a cure. But Stefan Molyneux, he put out one, Ebola Outbreak Propaganda Decoded. I'm going to go ahead and cue this up.
Hi everybody, Stefan Molyneux from Freedom Aid Radio. Hope you're doing well. As you've probably heard, there has been an Ebola breakout in Africa. New cases of Ebola were first identified in Guinea, beginning in February 2014, and have since spread to Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Nigeria. As of August the 4th, 2014, 887 people have died from the virus, making this Ebola epidemic the largest and deadliest in history. With a mortality rate of more than 60%, the deadly virus has become the center of growing fears throughout the world. Now, so far, 2 American doctors have contracted the virus in Africa and were brought back to the U.S. for treatment. And this is, of course, making people feel even more terrified that the virus is now inside the U.S. border. So how afraid should you be? Well, let's try and put Ebola in perspective. So the World Health Organization estimates the global influenza or flu deaths to be between 250,000 and 500,000 a year. From 1977 to 2007, the annual number of influenza-related deaths in the U.S. ranged between 3,000 and 49,000. The extremely contagious measles virus annually kills about 120,000 worldwide. For comparison, again, as of August 4th, Ebola has claimed the lives of about 2,500 people since its first outbreak in 1976. So, putting that in perspective, the annual number of flu deaths in the U.S. goes from 3,000 to 49,000 per year. And since 1976, Ebola has claimed the lives of about 2,500 people in total. So, that's, I guess, relatively important in terms of keeping things in perspective. Now, you may have heard some fear-mongers and panic-mongers. Storm Clouds Gathering has a video where he claims that the virus has gone airborne, and this does not seem to be the case at all, and we'll get into that in a moment. Ebola is significantly less contagious than either influenza or measles. Epidemiologists use this quantitative measure called the Basic Reproduction Number, or BRN, and this statistically determines the contagiousness of diseases. The BRN corresponds to the secondary number of infections caused by a single primary case, and it doesn't take into account immunity and disease control measures. Ebola's basic reproduction number is estimated to be between 1.34 and 1.83, while one of the lowest estimates for the BRN of measles is 7.17. So alternative media outlets have claimed that the contagiousness of Ebola is being severely underestimated or underreported by leading experts and the mainstream media. They have cited animal studies as evidence that Ebola is an airborne virus. Now, an airborne virus does not require water droplets to sustain itself or to carry itself, and this does not seem to be the case with Ebola at all. So one study put pigs carrying the virus in close proximity but without direct contact to macaques, and after about 8 days, some of the monkeys began to show signs of being infected with Ebola. So Dr. Gary Kobinger, one of the scientists involved in the experiment, said, "What we suspect is happening is large exhaled droplets. They can stay in the air, but not long. They don't go far. But they can be absorbed in the airway, and this is how the infection starts. And this is what we think, because we saw a lot of evidence in the lungs of the non-human primates that the virus got in that way." Dr. Kobinger further explains the difference between human Ebola cases and respiratory disease outbreaks. Quote, "The reality is that Ebola cases are contained and they remain local. If it was really an airborne virus like influenza is, it would spread all over the place, and that's not happening." So they put these pigs and these monkeys for over a week in a pretty tightly enclosed environment. So the statistical chances of being exposed to the virus become significantly higher. And this hasn't been proven for human beings, but even if the study's findings do translate to human cases, the people who are most likely to contract airborne, or air-carried is a better way of putting it, Ebola, are medical professionals treating sick patients. Now, a 2004 study of the aerosol or air particle threats posed by filoviruses such as Ebola concluded, quote, "It is clear in the animal model study that filoviruses can infect by the aerosol or air particle route, and that extraordinarily low doses are lethal for both guinea pigs and non-human primates. The epidemiological data from natural outbreaks would suggest, however, that the aerosol infectious dose for humans is considerably higher, that the survivability of filoviruses as a respirable particle is very short outside of controlled laboratory conditions, or that infected patients do not expire or breathe out infectious virus particles. Better developed animal models and studies need to be conducted to better understand these apparent differences, which are critical to evaluating the threat posed by filoviruses." So basically what they're saying is that the infectious dose for humans would be higher than, of course, guinea pigs and non-human primates, that filoviruses like Ebola really can't survive at all for any period of time outside of controlled laboratory conditions, and infected patients do not breathe out infected virus particles, so it's really not gone to the air, so to speak. A 1999 study published in the Journal of Infectious Diseases stated, quote, "There is considerable misunderstanding concerning the potential for aerosol transmission of filoviruses. The data on formal aerosol experiments leave no doubt that Ebola and Marburg viruses are stable and infectious in small particle aerosols, and experience of transmission between experimental animals in the laboratory supports this." Sounds scary, yes. They go on to say, "However, this is far from saying that Ebola viruses are transmitted in the clinical setting by small particle aerosols generated from an index patient. Indeed, patients without any direct exposure to a known EHF, Ebola hemorrhagic fever, case were carefully sought but uncommonly found. The conclusion is that if this mode of spread occurred, it was very minor." Now, a member of the Center for Disease Control's Viral Special Pathogens branch, Craig Manning, who was deployed to Uganda during a 2007 Ebola outbreak, commented, quote, "If you ask me if I'd rather be in a room with influenza patients or I'd rather be in a room with Ebola patients, I would tell you I'd rather be in a room with Ebola patients because I know what to do to protect myself. Whereas with influenza, which is airborne, any protective measures in that confined space are probably not going to be effective. Ebola is not that easy to transmit person to person, but influenza very easily transmits from person to person. Now, of course, tragically, even if Ebola was far more contagious, it incapacitates and kills its victims so fast that it gives them little chance to spread the disease around. Furthermore, people who carry the virus aren't infectious until they become sick and likely bedridden, which further limits the likelihood of exposing others to the virus. So contracting Ebola requires direct or indirect exposure to the bodily fluids, blood, sweat, urine, semen, etc., of a sick person or animal. The virus primarily enters the human body through tiny skin cuts and abrasions, or through mucous membranes of the eyes, nose, ears, and mouth. Fortunately, soap and hot water are enough to kill the virus. Director of the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, Peter Pyatt, stated, quote, "I wouldn't be worried to sit next to someone with Ebola virus on the tube of the subway, as long as they don't vomit on you or something." Now, experts claim that Ebola could easily be contained through better hygiene and education amongst Africans. Professor Chris Whitty of the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine stated, quote, "The situation is moving very quickly. The numbers are increasing in Sierra Leone, but they appear to have peaked in Guinea, where the epidemic first started. What we hope is that with good management and good control, we should be able to start to see the peak of the epidemic, and then it will start to decrease." Grant Brown and Jacob Olson from the University of Iowa's Department of Biostatistics analyzed available data, and their mathematical models, quote, predicted a temporary continuation of epidemic activity followed by a decrease into the fall. So let's compare this Ebola to the swine flu. The most recent serious epidemic was the H1N1 influenza or swine flu outbreak in 2009. Laboratory tests confirmed 18,449 H1N1 related deaths, with the CDC estimating the actual death toll to be 284,000 worldwide. A vaccine was developed within a few months of the outbreak, but the number of available doses was lower than expected. Now, H1N1 was largely contained through the usual means, tracking down and quarantining everyone who has come in contact with an infected person, limiting travel, and spreading information about how to deal with potential exposure to the virus. Similar methods have been employed in the 2014 Ebola outbreak, even though the virus is expected to contain itself tragically due to the high mortality rate. During the 2012 Ebola outbreak in Uganda, Health Minister Dr. Christine Ondoa claimed, quote, "The Ebola virus is a self-limiting disease. It can wipe out a family or a village. When there are no more people to infect, it dies down. Isolation is the solution and will contain it." Now, there are several factors that contribute to the severity of the current outbreak. The affected countries have no history of Ebola epidemics, and so the locals are largely unaware of how to deal with the virus. African people, of course, have been increasingly unwilling to cooperate with the professionals deployed to contain the epidemic, believing medical personnel will further spread the virus within their communities. Superstition and paranoia are also not helping matters. The magazine The Economist reports some Sierra Leoneans say they fear that the government wants to sell the blood of Ebola patients, or that it will remove patients' limbs for ritual purposes. Others think health workers will inject them with Ebola, or that the ubiquitous chlorine disinfectant spray will give them the disease, or simply that the virus is an invention to help the government bring in donations. This is why doctors and health workers are sometimes blocked from accessing affected areas. According to the World Health Organization, not all infected people seek medical care and thus further spread the virus amongst their families and local communities. Some Africans actually are hiding potential cases, fearing that their loved ones will die in isolation when quarantined. Now, tragically, African funeral traditions involve washing the body before it's buried, which means the people involved in the ceremonies get in contact with the victim's bodily fluids. The Chicago Tribune comments, quote, public health workers haven't been able to curtail this traditional practice. It's a challenge that puts religious and cultural beliefs in direct conflict with infection control. So, obviously, desperately tragic for everyone involved. Is it an airborne, world-spanning, civilization-destroying illness? It does not seem to be that way at all, and it really bothers me the degree to which people put out this grab your passports and hide in your basement doom porn out there. Really, if you're putting this kind of terrifying information out there, you really need to think twice. Most of the people who will swallow this information probably have significant mental health problems with regards to paranoia and hypersuspicion and so on. So you really kind of are playing, or preying really, on some of the most vulnerable and scared members of society. And it really is important to follow this through to the end to get the full range of expert opinion and to understand that we're not facing anything desperately dangerous for the world as a whole. People are afraid that these people have been flown to America and now the Ebola virus is in America. Well, it has been in America for years. They've got it in universities and in labs. They're studying it and so on. So people know how to take care of this kind of virus. They know how to contain it. And this is not exactly... The national debt happens, right? The national debt just happens because there's political motives for it. There's no political motives, of course, for unleashing some sort of plague on humanity. So it's not going to be the case. The disease is going to be taken care of. I'm sure of that. So let's get back to worrying about far more important and dangerous issues. This is Stefan Molyneux from Free Domain Radio. Thank you so much for listening and watching. Sleep well.
Now, I completely disagree that there's no political motive. There's plenty political motives. Reduce the population and makes it easier to control. When outbreaks happen, it gives the government a lot more control. There are political gains to this. Definitely when you understand that, you know, when government is so corrupt as he'll even admit to that, then turn on you CDC reports. I there's a little problem there. At least in my opinion. My opinion is that I just don't trust all of these, and it's a good way to push vaccines, you know. And it looks like someone in chat realizes that it's a good way to push vaccines. I really would like to hear your opinion on this. We do have a call-in number. I'm not quite sure if the phone is forwarded. But you can go ahead and try. It's 718-717-8296. That's 718-717-8296. Not quite sure if the phones are forwarded, though. Might see if I can have someone check that for me. I don't know if anybody can double check that, but hopefully they're open. But, you know, there was a Russian scientist that defected to the U.S. that had talked about they were trying to make the Ebola virus airborne. And this was under Soviet Union. And realizing that, you know, what they were actually trying to do and understood, defected to the U.S. And another thing that came, Kit Daniels out of InfoWars, Ebola outbreak can lead to gun confiscations and martial law. which we already know this can happen. It says here, back in 2009, CNN reported that U.S. Northern Command, NORTHCOM, wanted to establish regional teams of military personnel to assist civilian authorities in the event of a severe outbreak in America. The plan calls for a military task force to work in conjunction with the Federal Emergency Management Agency, wrote CNN correspondent Barbara Starr. There is no final decision on how the military effort would be manned, but one source said it would likely include personnel from all branches of the military. A few months prior, Air Force General Victor Ranort said NORTHCOM would provide assistance and support of civil authorities during an epidemic, adding when requested and approved by the Secretary of Defense or directed by the President, federal military forces will contribute to federal support. But Runart also said that U.S. NORTHCOM does not wait for the call to action, or wait for that call to action. Since then, the federal government created a new domestic command structure in which, during a government-declared emergency, the military police would work under FEMA and the Department of Homeland Security for domestic operations with the National Guard. This command structure was leaked by a former MP who secretly recorded a military briefing last September in which an Army commander briefed him and other MPs on their domestic duties with FEMA during martial law, including escorting federal officials as they confiscate firearms from Americans. And I'm going to play that clip here.
He's saying he's a military police, and he says, and we've been sent footage before by military police and others, so I want this footage of them in briefings openly talking about gun confiscations. Now, that's now in the manuals that they're training to quarantine cities and towns and confiscate guns. We've had Navy SEALs on confirming it. We have the documents. We know that. But footage, not just in some Army manual, but footage could really, really hurt the folks that are trying to covertly prepare the military for basically civil war. Brian, obviously, you've got to go back in right now. Tell us as much as you can and how we get this footage, but describe it for us.
Okay, so I was in a briefing with FEMA. FEMA runs my old unit. I'm actually out now. I got out in September of this year. They were talking about suspension of the Constitution, Second and Fourth Amendment rights being taken away, and I openly asked him, are we going to take guns? He says no, but he says they will. It's clearly on the video. They will, talking about the FEMA guys with us. So that's the gist of the video. You could. I'm filming the floor because it kind of startled me when they said that they're going to suspend the Constitution under martial law, which is pretty scary to me.
Essentially, yeah, we pretty much at that time, your Second Amendment, all your rights, First Amendment rights, pretty much everything is at that moment just interrupt them. Yeah.
So you said that martial law suspends their Second Amendment, so I'm not going to, but would you say we would take weapons from people?
Yeah, that's what they do. Yeah.
That's what they do, but I'm
saying... Yes, I wouldn't agree with that either. I'm the Second Amendment. I live in the Second Amendment. But
okay.
Essentially during a moment of martial law, we've lost all control. We're pretty much saying when the military moves in on your street, they are now saying you have no more rights for you're going second house. That's like the worst case scenario. So I'm saying when the way they're not looking at it, when the guard is used, that's how it's going to be used.
Yeah.
So we're not going to be out there on the street corner and like, hey, we're here. Unless we're like your system was some kind of event, you're not going to be involved in a riot and not really have any authority to do it.
You're not going to go knocking on doors and be like, all right, I need a shotgun. Here. You're not going to go up to each house and say...
Well, they did that in Katrina, is why I'm asking. And if we're talking about shit hitting the fan, I'm not going to do it, but...
They're not going to do that necessarily. It's more or less like, hey, go in your house. Shut up, stay there. That's what we do.
Okay.
Because the reason I have martial law in place is it's one of those situations where, like I said, everything's already broken down. It's a last resort to change pretty much your last ditch effort to put that back in order into that kingdom. That's why they have an actual guard.
Okay.
They did that in Katrina, right? They just want to take what people have done.
Yeah. Which I think is bullshit, but...
Do you claim your right to the price that you hold in hand?
Yeah.
We're going to get political right now.
That's that question.
And that was out of InfoWars. And they got that footage that he sent in. And so to say that there wouldn't be any political motive, I think is premature, and you're getting too statistical and not looking at what is really going on when you do have them admitting that. And again, they've already laid out plans for martial law for any type of outbreak. And then when you see on top of that, the media pushing, potential outbreak, not the alternative, but the mainstream. And they're going, oh, they'll quarantine them. So now you should accept it, but we've already kind of planted it in your head that there could be an outbreak. But to accept that there won't be one for now. So when an outbreak does happen, they'll be like, oh yeah, we gotta contain this because, this outbreak, it'll spread. All you need is that Ebola to leak out of one of those hospitals. And then, he brought up, in that last clip, see, I like Stefan. I think he does do some great videos when it comes to the philosophy of, the libertarian, the non-aggression principle. I do kind of, disagree with it here, though. Let me see if I can find this other one. Okay, I found it. This one out of InfoWars, which said CDC concerned about airborne transmission of Ebola virus. Said despite repeated assurances that Ebola virus cannot be transmitted via airborne particles, the CDC is concerned about that very outcome and has directed airline staff to take steps to prevent the spread of infectious material through the air. While Ebola is highly contagious, the risk of a full-blown pandemic has been downplayed by health authorities because according to our current understanding of the virus, Ebola is not airborne and is transmitted through contact with bodily fluids, including sweat and blood. However, with concerns rising that current strain of the virus, which is the worst in history, has killed 887, which Stefan brought that up, it's the worst outbreak ever seen in the history of Ebola, the fastest spreading, and it's not like it hasn't broke out in Africa before. This isn't the only time that Ebola has broken out, and this one seems to be a little bit different. So it killed 887 people, could in fact be airborne. The Centers for Disease Control have implemented steps to prevent its spread via international air travel. A CDC advisory entitled Interim Guidance About Ebola Virus Infection for Airline Flight Crews, Cleaning Personnel, and Cargo Personnel reveals that the federal agency is concerned about airborne contamination. So if it's not airborne, why are they worried about airborne? So, says here the advisory urges airline staff to provide surgical masks to potential Ebola victims in order to reduce the number of droplets expelled into the air. That's another thing, bodily fluids. Well, when you breathe out, what do you breathe out? Vapor. When that scientist defected from the Soviet Union to the U.S., he said that they were pretty close. Well, if it can be transmitted through bodily fluids, to get it to be able to stay in the air, definitely in humid climates maybe, it wouldn't be too hard. I think that if they were close to weaponizing it airborne back then, who's to say they haven't done now? Says the CDC is also directing airline cleaning personnel to not use compressed air, which might spread infectious material through the air. The CDC's concern about the Ebola virus being spread via the air is understandable in light of a 2012 experiment conducted by Canadian scientists, which proved that the Ebola virus could be transmitted by air between species. Researchers demonstrated the virus could be transmitted from pigs to monkeys without any direct contact by placing the two animals in pens separated only by a wire barrier. After 8 days, some of the monkeys were found to have symptoms of Ebola, likely as a result of inhaling large aerosol droplets produced from the respiratory tracts of the pigs. The result of the study led scientists to conclude that limited airborne transmission might be contributing to the spread of the disease in some parts of Africa, although they caution against making comparisons to the airborne nature of the influenza virus. In addition, the Public Health Agency of Canada's official website states under a section entitled Mode of Transmission that airborne spread among humans is strongly suspected, although it has not yet been conclusively demonstrated. The potential for a new strain of the Ebola virus to have achieved airborne transmission only serves to cast further doubt on the logic of the United States choosing to import two Ebola sufferers into the country. As we reported last week, President Obama signed an amendment to executive order which allows health authorities to detain Americans who merely show signs of respiratory illness. The CDC has also outlined measures for dealing with an outbreak of a communicable disease which will allow for the quarantine of well persons who do not show symptoms of the disease. So what we're seeing is basically we have the chance of going from one extreme to the other. Oh, we're not quarantining these people right now, and we're just, we're not even sealing them off at all if they might have it. And then when it spreads, what's going to happen? They're going to start forcibly quarantining people, taking people's guns. Yes, there is a political motive. And when you see the slope that we're on, it's not too hard to think, hey, they would do something like that. And Obama said it. He said it when, well, I'll use my pen. And executive orders like that, and his ability to sign them and no one questions them and actually follows them, yeah, there's definitely a political motive there. Okay. Give me a second here. Let me find it here. Maybe. I didn't want to have to do this, but I'm going to have to. I'll type it in YouTube and I can't find it, but then if I sign in, I can, so. Okay, now I'm signed in. Now I should be able to find it. Okay. I'm not sure if I played it on here. I think I've talked about it, but David Icke, he's one of those people that a lot of people make fun of, but when he talks, there's certain things that he talks about, and there's a clip that came out of We Are Change, and it was David Icke, Stop Censoring Your Perception, Part 2. And I think this is important when you're looking at issues like this whole Ebola outbreak. Yeah, there's fear-mongering, and then there's lack of precaution in certain areas. People that might be infected, they don't even take the precaution. Well, we'll stick you over here and not have a whole bunch of people walking by your room with the open door. Instead, they just leave them out in the open, then they bring in people that are infected, and, oh, it's not airborne, when there's fear that it could be airborne. That it might have mutated to that point. Which is why, more than likely, we're having these long tests being done here in the U.S. to test for Ebola, and these special laboratories doing the testing instead of the quick testing that they're doing over in Africa. So, I'm going to play this clip. We do need to change our perception of how we're viewing things. Definitely when we're viewing statistics that are coming from the same corrupt government that we're arguing against. So, let me go ahead and cue this up.
Open your mind and let the information be your guide, not preconceived idea, because people say, you know, in the alternative media, we must stop censorship. Well, stop censoring your perception.
That lesson that you talk about, understanding the frequencies and tuning it into the right direction, it's been something that I personally learned myself after losing my job, broke my ankle, broke my thumb. Girlfriend of 2 years that I thought I was going to marry started breaking up with me and cheating on me, and I went through a lot of problems in my life, and I remember just going through just the most absolute personal pain, and only because of that pain was I able to realize that we are kind of in charge of our frequencies. And that's what made me make this subway video, the Just Keep Going, You Have Nothing to Lose, which is an example of how sitting there on the subway, we have a choice to make. We could either sit there, be miserable, be sad, or we could go out there, open up, talk to people, exchange ideas, and learn from each other. Now this kind of energy, I like to kind of describe it as a spiritual war. I think a lot of people also in the alternative media are also kind of getting the worst of it as well. I think a lot of people in the alternative media aren't tuned into the right things, and then that they're still filled with ego and pride and fear, and you see that exemplified. So even in our field.
Well, if you want to see internet expressions of the distortion, go on alternative media forums.
Yep.
And, you want to change the world? You are the world you want to change. What are you doing? All this abuse and stuff that goes on. And that's a frequency. It's a very low frequency. Yep. It's a distortion. It's not the natural order to go on a website forum and hurl vile abuse at people. Yep. It's just extraordinary, the self-denial that people have of what they really are compared with what they think they are.
There's a lot of fear and a lot of insecurity, which leads people automatically to treat others just as bad as they feel themselves in order to get rid of that pain that they have within them. So you see that naturally progressing, but naturally to the people in our movement, the people in the alternative media, what do you think is the most important lesson that they should understand? What do you think that they should know? Because I think that they're caught up in this spiritual war as well, but I think they're caught up in the wrong direction. How can we bring them in the right direction? What can we do? I know it's very personal on an individual basis. It takes a lot of different things in your life to see these things, but what can we do to help people understand this kind of spiritual war that we're talking about?
Well, I like the word war, because that is a distortion as well in its vibration. But it's a frequency tussle, shall we say, of whether the frequency of balance is dominant over the frequency of distortion. And clearly, in the world that it is, the distortion is king. Because how it works is, because it's a distortion, it has great limitations when it comes to what it can do, what it can manifest, what it can create, compared with balance, the natural order. And so it has had to pull its targets into that distortion for this reason, because it is the distortion. It's an expert at the distortion. The people it pulls in are not. They're the experts. They're playing at home in a distorted state. And so what they've created, although they are incredibly limited, is a world in which, in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. But if you can open your heart to good intent, positive intent, again, coming back to intent, then you become the two-eyed, third-eyed man, a woman. And at that point, you become more powerful than the distortion. You become able to understand reality better than the distortion. Because when it comes to the occult and the rituals, they are dealing with what I call the intellectual spirituality, if you like, intellectual knowledge of reality, technological perception of reality, because you can use the word technological for their rituals, because they're very repetitive and they have certain ways of doing things to manipulate energy. But true spiritual, balanced understanding doesn't need rituals to change reality. It just changes reality. Can do it with its thoughts, can do it with its everyday life, because it has a power that doesn't need ritual. Ritual is in so many ways an expression of trying to overcome the limitation that this distortion and its manifestations have of what they can create and what they can do. It's like me jumping off the cliff here and flying against having to go and get in a plane. And so a common theme that I've picked up over the years is that the various expressions of this distortion in terms of entities of various kinds and these Illuminati bloodlines, they're in constant fear of being found out. And they're in constant fear of the truth about reality being understood. Why? Because the game's up. Why is it that... this was interesting because we all come into this arena from a different direction. Some people come in by investigating UFOs and realizes they're a cover-up, and they step in and suddenly they see this big connected conspiracy. And some people coming through here. How I came into it was this. I started to realize 25 years ago, next year, that the explanations for reality that I found credible were not taught in the schools. You never saw them on the television. Science was dismissing them as nonsense. And I started to think, well, why is this? Why is this knowledge, which for me has credibility, and I see all these years later in far, far greater detail what credibility it has, why is it being suppressed? Well, it's being suppressed because we have to be kept in ignorance of who we are and the nature of the reality we're interacting with and how we impact ourselves on that reality and how that reality impacts itself on us, the way we're describing. Because with that knowledge, it's all over. Mm-hmm. We have to be kept in ignorance. And what's ignorance? Ignorance is an expression of distortion. It's not the natural order to be ignorant. It's the natural order to be all-knowing. And so one of the things I would say to people in the alternative media, or the mainstream of alternative media as I call it, is don't be a mirror of what you're condemning. Don't talk about sheeple who you say close their minds and close their eyes to the obvious fact that there is a conspiracy going on, when you are closing your mind to anything beyond where you are. Open your mind and let the information be your guide, not preconceived idea, because people say, in the alternative media, we must stop censorship. Well, stop censoring your perception all day, every day, because that's what they're doing. Yeah. They are self-censoring their perception by dismissing something by reflex action because it's different to their current belief. And as Einstein put it so well, that condemnation without investigation is the height of ignorance. Mm-hmm. And so it's people who want to really, really understand what the conspiracy is and where it's come from. And that's important because, you see, you can't divorce a problem from the solution, because how can you find a solution to something if you don't know what the problem is? You don't know the nature of the problem. Okay, fix my car. What's wrong with it? I don't know. Oh, well, I'm going to fix it then. And so it's important that people keep their minds open and allow in concepts that they currently would reject. See if they stand up. Don't just, no, just let it in. And what happens if you do, then you start to realize that what you were laughing at and ridiculing and dismissing actually has enormous credibility, far more credibility than the belief system you had before. I mean, I've been ridiculed about talking about non-human entities manipulating our society, and some of them taking a reptilian form and stuff like that, by people who believe that a guy was born to a virgin mother, died on a cross, 3 days later came back to life in a cave, and then went into the sky from a hill, promising to come back on a cloud. You know? Yeah. I'm thinking, you're laughing at me? But this is it. The programming, belief system programming, does not do self-reappraisal. It just does bleep, 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 bleep. And, you know, the idea that you can get all that you need to know to see how the world works and to make a difference as a result of that knowledge, that all you need to know is between the covers of a book, be it the Bible, the Quran, or anything, and knowledge within this tiny frequency we call visible light. That is insane to believe that that's all you want. But here we go. If you want to keep people in ignorance, and ignorance keeps them in the distortion, you've got to squeeze their knowledge as much as possible. And in many aspects of religion actually condemn seeking knowledge beyond the religion, right? And then you look at the education system, which is just a programming operation, and you get kids in at a ever younger age now. Some idiot over here in Britain, in the education establishment, is now calling for children to start school at 2, because they want them programmed as early as possible, and they want to get more and more control over them and less influence from parents, and there's for the many reasons for that. So you get them in at the start, and you tell them what to believe, what is right and wrong, possible and impossible, good and bad, all the way through. You keep out all the esoteric stuff. You never go there. In fact, you have rules to stop television stations broadcasting the stuff, and out the other end comes an already programmed person, unless they've held their ground, and many young people do these days, but many don't. And then you take that programming through education, and then you add a religion to it, right? And then you add the media to it. I mean, what? You know, what was it? The line goes, you know, if you go to kindergarten and a nice teacher tells you 2 and 2 equals 5, and then you go to school and 2 and 2 equals 5, college 2 and 2 equals 5, university 2 and 2 equals 5, media 2 and 2 equals 5, peer pressure who've been through the same system, 2 and 2 equals 5. You'll go through your life believing 2 and 2 equals 5. But as Gandhi said, even if you're a minority of one, the truth is still the truth, because 2 and 2 still equals 4.
Exactly. And that's why I think it's very important for people, especially in the alternative media, to, number one, humble themselves, and number two, question everything, and not to be afraid to go places that other people won't go to, but don't claim like you know the ultimate truth, because ultimately no one does. And really, I think it's also a lot of fear and a lot of placating to the audience that a lot of people in this kind of field and this alternative media sphere kind of do, because they're afraid. You know, naturally people play to that fear of, I won't talk to David Icke or interview him or take him seriously, because if I do, my reputation is going to be, ruined or whatever. But ultimately what I learned, and especially from you should never be afraid to go to places that other people won't. You should never placate to your audience. You should never change yourself based on outside perceptions of other people. You should always be the truest version of yourself, and the ultimate version of truth is to question everything and not to be afraid to be yourself. And you have definitely taught me that lesson from 25 years now of being just ridiculed and abused, but you still stand there and you've been proven right, and you've helped so many people in so many different ways that it's just really a very inspiring story when people look into everything that you have done. You sold out Wembley before. And you're doing it again this year as well. So that information is going to be in the website below. But David, I guess the last question is very open-sourced one, kind of. What would be your message to humanity? One thing that you could say to everyone in this whole world, if they had to listen, what's one thing you would tell them?
Easy then. Well, off the cuff. Look at the world and look at your life. Look at your sources of information all your life, where they've come from, who's decided what information you receive and what you can't receive, and ask yourself if, on the basis of that, you can possibly have a real fix on who you are and where we are and what's going on in the world. And the answer has to be, well, I can't. Ask yourself how possibly you could know all you need to know by reading a single book. How you could know all you need to know by going through a state-controlled, curriculum-controlled, information-controlled education system. Or how you could, through a system-controlled, corporation-owned, information-controlled media. So, beyond that, beyond those sources of information, is a whole infinite universe of awareness, of insight, of knowledge, of understanding, just waiting to be tapped, just waiting. So it's just sitting there saying, come to me, come to me, come to me. And the system's saying, no, go away, don't go there, don't go to mad, don't go there. And so the choice between remaining a perception terminal of the system's version of everything and tapping into this infinity of awareness is just a choice. Choice you can make today, a choice you can make now. Do I open my mind to all possibility, or do I reject anything that everyone else doesn't believe? And that's the question. And, you know, when you are in a crazy world and you make the choice to no longer be crazy, there are challenges, because those still crazy will abuse you, ridicule you, marginalize you, be embarrassed for you. Oh, I'm ever so embarrassed about my daughter, my son. He's become one of them hippies. Well, they're not making you become one, are they, Mother? Well, no. Well, shut up then. Let them get on with it. And the question is, are people going to be them, or are they going to be someone else's version of what they are told they should be? And that's the true difference. People talk about freedom. We want freedom. I hear the alternative media. Freedom, free America, free that, free the other. But they're not free, because they're not free to think. They're not free to perceive. They're not free to intuit awareness, because they're censoring it on the basis of their programming. And it's all a choice. It's all a choice. People can change now, this minute, watching this, if they choose. Open your mind, open your heart, go with your intuition. Instead of, what do I think? What do I think? What do you feel? What do you feel? Do that, and your life will transform. Transform, because your frequency changes. When you go with your intuition, your frequency changes, because it's a different frequency to thought. Go with that, and amazing things will start to happen. You won't like all of them, but they'll be necessary. And with every challenge, there'll be the benefit of greater awareness. It's a fantastic journey. People can start on it anytime they want. And when they do, they'll realize what they've been missing.
Very, very well said, David.
Cheers,
Thank
Luke.
you so
Always great
much.
to meet you, mate.
And that's something that we really need to be focusing on, is questioning what we believe. A lot of people say, well, I have this strong belief, and I'm just going to continually push that I have this strong belief, but not push why, and not question why. Not go, when you start saying something like, when it comes to the whole, argument that we shouldn't be taxed, we shouldn't be robbed of money to pay for someone else's living. We shouldn't be forcibly having our wealth taken to be handed off to someone else. But then, when I was a constitutionalist, I'd be saying, but, we have to pay something for defense. Well, you're still robbing from someone to pay for something that they may not believe in. And when you see the aggression and the wars that are constantly being fought, and you don't believe in those wars, then taxation is theft. And when you understand that, then you break out of that box that you've been in, because instead of questioning what you're saying, your own beliefs, you were just ramming, we shouldn't pay for welfare, we have to pay for defense. You're still robbing. If you don't want to be robbed to potentially help someone's safety and health, but then at the same time say, well, other people should be robbed to pay for their defense, their health, their security, and you're being hypocritical at that point, and that's where you have to say, well, if the U.S. is really being great at what they're doing, then people wouldn't have a problem paying into it. It's that free market theory. That if it's so great, then you won't have a problem getting people to pay for it. But we're constantly stuck in this box that we see so many people argue, well, and you'll see it on the left too. It's not just, the right, but the left does it too. They're anti-war. We shouldn't have to pay for these wars, but then claim that other people should have to pay for their health care and their birth control. And it's no. Do you not want to pay for the wars? Then don't make us pay for this. But by keeping people in that mindset is how they've keeping up this charade of this left-right paradigm, when that is a creation to keep people divided. When you see that the people at the top of these parties are playing the game. So we have to question ourselves if we want to be that change. And, when it comes to law enforcement, you shouldn't have to be robbed of money to pay for that. Definitely when we see the amount of, brutality coming out of law enforcement communities, the militarization of these law enforcement, communities, and that shield that is put up. So we definitely have to do that. Now, we can constantly attack people, and that'll keep us divided. What we have to attack directly is the tactics. Because when we're attacking each other, attacking people, we make it more personal. Therefore, it becomes emotional. And again, it builds up that hate. What we have to start doing is attacking the tactics used to put those morals back into the discussion instead of the emotions. Is this justifiable? Is this right? What constitutes as right? What is your tax money used for that you disagree with? Well, I agree that you should not be robbed of money to pay for that. But neither should I be robbed of money to pay for what I don't believe in. Let's stop playing the game of, I don't want this, but you should pay for that. How about this? We don't pay for each other's crap. And the thing is, people are like, well, if people, some of these people are just completely dependent on the government. But not all of them. And we have to understand that. There's a lot that will champion that and be like, look, we're both getting robbed. I don't agree with paying for that. You don't agree with paying for this. How about this? We both agree we shouldn't be robbed of money to pay for something we disagree with. That is the issue. That is the tactic. It's not paying for health care. It's that people are being robbed to pay for things they disagree with and don't believe in. That goes against freedom. It becomes such a deep issue in society that, it is that perpetual thing that happens, that you just continually see the same mistakes being made over and over and over. And for people that have become aware, it's frustrating to watch it. For the people that become aware of this matrix that we are living in, basically, it's your responsibility to make these arguments. But again, you have to make it on the tactics, not directly on what they believe that they have the right to when it comes to, well, I have the right to seek birth control. Okay, you have that right. I agree. You should be able to go get birth control. But you don't agree with me paying for this. So how about this? I'll pay for this voluntarily because that's what I want my tax money to go to. Instead of it being a tax, I'm voluntarily paying for only this. And I won't have someone with a gun show up when I don't want to pay for your birth control. And you'll be paying for your birth control because that's what you want, instead of being taxed. We have to reach that evolutionary thinking. We have to seek out ways to bring us together. And those are ways that we can do it. Give me a second here. Okay. This was an interview that Adam Kokesh did. It was statehood for Puerto Rico. Adam talks to a former Bush administration official who supports statehood for Puerto Rico because he thinks people and groups magically get extra rights.
So you're behind statehood for Puerto Rico, is that right?
Absolutely.
Okay, well, let's get into that. Why don't you just start by telling us your name, where you're from, who you're with, and why you're here today?
My name is Alfonso Aguilar. I'm with American Principles Project, a major conservative organization. I'm the former chief of the U.S. Office of Citizenship in the Bush administration.
And you're here at the Equality for Puerto Rico booth. What's the mission here?
It's to ensure that Puerto Ricans, the U.S. citizens of Puerto Rico, achieve full equality through statehood. Puerto Rico has been a territory for 116 years. Puerto Ricans are U.S. citizens, but they can't vote for president. The president who sends our children to war. We don't have adequate and voting representation in Congress. So this goes against the very basic principles of American democracy. That's why Ronald Reagan supported statehood for Puerto Rico. Rand Paul wants to end the territory and let the people of Puerto Rico choose their future. But what it's clear that our nation, and we know this as constitutional conservatives, our nation was born a republic, not an empire. So to hold a territory with U.S. citizens for over 116 years without full rights, we fought a war of independence over that with England. Right. So it's ironic that we're doing to Puerto Rico what King George did to us over 200 years ago.
Are you saying that America is an empire now?
It wasn't, but it's not. It is not. But the only remnants of our short-lived experiment with imperialism is Puerto Rico, which was the Spanish-American War. And historically, that was the only time where America, especially in the Western Hemisphere, tried to expand, and we kept Puerto Rico. So the only remnant of what we could call the short-lived period of American imperialism is Puerto Rico.
So it's not an empire, it's just got a vestigial element of it. Well, just to be clear then, what is your definition of empire?
Empire is when a government, an imperial government, say in this case the United States, governs another people, and the people have no say. Federal laws apply to Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico has no vote over them. So we're governing here in Washington the people of Puerto Rico in federal matters. So that is imperial.
Well, you mean like setting up a government in Iraq or Afghanistan or imposing martial law in those countries, even in a post-war environment?
Well, yes. I mean, it would be like going into Iraq and keeping Iraq and governing Iraq. And that's what happened with the Spanish-American War. We went into Puerto Rico, we kept it.
And California.
And we could give away California and Vermont too. Vermont, why would we trade Puerto Rico for Vermont? I tell you, it would be a beautiful swap, And there's nobody in Vermont anyway.
You sound like a big fan of self-determination, is that right?
I'm a fan of the Constitution of the United States and this is the government of the people, for the people, and by the people. And the people of Puerto Rico are not fully free and not fully equal. So anybody who loves the Constitution and loves our country, I mean, we are the beacon of freedom. This is, as I said, the remnant of an era long gone, and we have to let the people of Puerto Rico decide, independence or statehood. I can guarantee you the majority are going to choose statehood. In fact, in November 2012, there was a plebiscite, and the majority of Puerto Ricans voted for statehood. So let's make it happen.
Certainly, they want that.
I want to pause it there because I think watching how he's answering some of these questions that Adam has thrown at him, he starts questioning, well, I do believe in that, but I gotta say I believe in the Constitution of the United States of America, by the people, for the people. But his facial expression was like, yeah, I love the Constitution. So that says a lot, and it's something you can't see. And so, sometimes when you question people, again, about, this policy, It's the way you approach them that makes them, even if they don't admit to you right there, that they start questioning that. In the back of their mind, they start questioning their own way of thinking. Let me question what I said I believe. But we'll get back to this clip.
That extra power, right? Well, then why would a state have the right to decide that, but not an individual? If I want to secede, or if I have my property, if I want to say, I want to be an independent state, I want to vote, I want to have my vote and my personal property between independence and statehood, and I vote for independence. Do I have that right?
Well, you do, but it's a different. You're not a collective, a political body. You're an individual. So if you don't like the collective where you live, the political body where you live, you can leave this country. In America, you can actually live it if you don't like it. I love it, so I stay.
So a collective has rights that an individual doesn't.
We're getting into deep political theory here. Yes, they're different. They're different rights. We have individual rights that the collective body politic doesn't have, but we cannot individually secede from the union. We cannot be. What's your name?
Adam.
Adam. You cannot become the citizen of Adam. In the United States.
Because I'm just an individual, I don't have all those rights.
Exactly. But you live within a country, and if you don't like the rights or how this country lives, the great thing about a country is that you have freedom of movement, so you could leave the United States.
Well, what if it's two of us? What if it's me and Brett here, and we want to form our own country, we want to secede or have our own state and have that right? Is two enough? Is two people enough? How about if we bring our families? Is that enough?
You've been talking to Governor Perry lately? Look, I believe that in the Union, and I believe in the promise of Lincoln of keeping this country together. We're a strong union. If anything, we should expand. During
it sounds like empire.
Not empire. Remember, we have manifest destiny.
So expand voluntarily?
Expand voluntarily. If they want to be part of us, then we incorporate them.
So make Mexico the 52nd state after Puerto Rico?
Well, we took over half of their territory.
Might as well get the other half, right?
It's not like five states. The half with the better roads. That's a terrible. No, but but I think the Mexican-American War was kind of an exercise. We took over half of the territory of Mexico. We can't say that they wanted to be with us. We just took it. Now that is history. But at least those people we incorporated, and now they're citizens. Utah, Colorado, all of that. Now we're saying with Puerto Rico, do the same thing.
I just want to get to this underlying philosophical issue, if you don't mind, because it is a really important one. You said individuals don't have rights that collectives do. You're saying I, as an individual, don't have a right to secede on my property. Two families, we don't have the right to secede on our property. At what point does a collective become big enough that it magically gets extra rights that individuals don't?
That is a very good question. I think, and the question, we have to go back to the principle of subsidiarity, which is government only interferes. There's a need for government. But for a very limited government. It's like when, again...
It should happen at the lowest level possible.
Absolutely. Subsidiarity is going to the local level, but also extremely limited. Only in those areas where we cannot resolve our disputes, or where the private individual cannot have autonomy or cannot take care of himself. What I would say is not that the state has more rights or we have more, it's that we have different rights. The states are much more limited than the individuals. Now, going back to secession of the individual, it's not secession, but I would call it civil disobedience. When the state becomes so large that they start controlling our lives, when they start saying you have to get health care.
Yeah, right.
And
that would be one of the reasons we'd be seceding, right, Brett? Yeah,
exactly.
Okay. And taxes and regulations and the central bank and control of the money supply.
And you have to get this type of services as part of your health care. Because not only buying health care is, you have to buy. Then I think you could engage in civil disobedience.
So it sounds like right now secession is a pretty good idea. If we have that right, maybe Puerto Rico should just go for complete independence.
Well, that could be an alternative. What is not an alternative...
They wouldn't have to put up with Obamacare.
That is true, but you know what? I think that at the end we love this country so much in America, and instead of seceding, what we have to take is take this country back from socialist, and we do it by creating a populist conservative movement, and we have it with people like Rand Paul, Ted Cruz, Mike Lee, and Marco Rubio, and Governor Perry, I must say, as well.
Well, this idea of America expanding is kind of an exciting idea, and Puerto Rico introduces this great thought experiment, right? But you keep going with that.
But it's not a new thing. We're talking about 116 years. Right. It happened 116 years ago. It's not like America's not expanding anymore.
But you keep going with this. If everybody wants to join America, next thing we've got is the American government is the global government. Is that a scenario you're looking forward to?
Well, there's something different from America expanding as a country and government expanding, right? So what we're saying is also let's remember that it's not only that we have to follow the principle of subsidiarity, which is a principle that I think applies to every democracy, but also in a federal republic as ours, the federal government has to be extremely limited. That's why I like when Governor Perry says, I want to make Washington as inconsequential as possible.
So why are you...
One thing I want to say is the whole problem with the concept of, we have to make the federal government more limited, but then expand the ability for people to become part of the federal government's union. Because that's what it is. And the problem with this is when a society, and this is just American history proving this, that when we reach a certain level of freedom, which we should, we become relaxed. And when there's already that established federal government, especially, not to mention, even state governments, it's not really till you get down to your little local area that you can have any type of effect. But if you're the minority, you will be ruled over. But when you change the mindsets and realize that it'll flip-flop, and that's proven again in American history, that in these relaxed states of freedom that you should have, you don't realize the amount of regulations and tyrannical moves that the federal government makes until it gets to the point like we are at right now. And we have these hiccups along the way where people start realizing it and they keep knocking us down. But I think that through the internet, the spread of this has gotten so large that I think this is more than a hiccup. I think this is the world waking up to this. Finish out this clip here.
Wanting Washington to be more consequential in the lives of Puerto Ricans.
Because by being a state, Washington cannot dictate like they're dictating right now. Okay. This is the ultimate oppression. That's why every single constitutional conservative libertarian should be against what's happening in Puerto Rico. Right. It's the ultimate usurpation of power of U.S. citizens. Talk about individual rights. I can't, if you live in Puerto Rico, you can't vote for the president who sends your kids to war.
Well, if this is the wrong track, though, that the country's on, going for bigger government and Obamacare, shouldn't we be dissolving the nation, going to more separatism, and voiding the federal government, stepping away from this overbearing control, rather than getting more, collectivist?
No. It means going back to the principles of our founding and going back to the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence and throwing the trash can, the ideas of the progressive movement that promoted big government and, as Woodrow Wilson called it, Darwinian democracy. That's pretty scary.
I want to declare my independence. I want to escape Obamacare and taxation and regulation on my own property, and I can't do that. And you're saying as an individual, I shouldn't.
Civil disobedience. Okay? You can do that. You can exercise civil disobedience. You have that right here.
Right, but that means that I get locked in a cage, right?
Leave to another country, but I don't know any country that is as free as ours. So what I'm saying is,
there are lots that are even more free that don't have Obamacare, that don't have our level of taxation. Sweden, Costa Rica, Argentina, even Mexico. You can buy off.
Are you kidding me?
I'm sorry, Switzerland. Oh, even excuse me. I apologize.
Hey.
I didn't want to give you a heart attack there. No, but there are lots of countries where, you know, if we're having, you know, we're on such a bad track in America where there really are more freedoms now.
Switzerland is the most boring country in the world.
Okay, so we can give up our freedoms for a little
Costa
excitement.
Rica, I know my father's from Costa Rica, another boring country. This is a vibrant country.
I've been surfing in Costa Rica. It's awesome.
Yeah, after surfing, what happens then? You know, you have a pupusa. That's it. You know, I don't know. It's
cocaine and hookers. I don't know.
No, look. This is about retaking our country. Let's make
gambling is legal in Costa Rica.
Ronald Reagan, gambling. Well, you know, on that's another issue. You know, are you for internet gambling? I'm not for internet gambling.
Absolutely, it's it's freedom. You have the right to do what you want with your own money.
Okay, I'm with Adelson on that one. But anyway,
you should take away that freedom.
Well, you know, again, the state has to interfere in some. Freedom is not absolute. There are limitations. I cannot kill you, right?
What is freedom?
Freedom is the ability to do as you choose as long as you don't hurt your neighbor.
Well, if I'm doing internet gambling, I'm not hurting my neighbor.
Well, there are different theories about that. You could hurt your neighbor when you have kids accessing online, on-demand gambling.
That's kids hurting themselves. It's not
Rico.
All right.
Anyway, my whole point is, let's take back our country. Why secede? Let's be an optimist. You see the glass half empty.
Well, I'm an optimist for liberty. I'm an optimist for liberty, not nationalism.
I don't believe in nationalism either. I'm a patriot. I'm not this is the problem. I am against nationalism. I'm for patriotism, which is very different.
Absolutely. Now, you have a very interesting story in your own career. Well, let's just wrap up. Do you mind giving us a couple minutes about your experience and what you've done in government?
Sure. Well, I served for 5 years in the government of Puerto Rico. I'm an attorney by trade, fighting for statehood for a very long time. I joined the Bush administration, worked for almost 8 years with President Bush, and I was the chief of citizenship in the Department of Homeland Security, was very involved in the fight for immigration reform, which I also think it's a fight for freedom, because right now immigrants are coming here because there are companies, U.S. citizens, that cannot find American workers, and big government is telling them, if you can't find American workers, you can't bring foreign workers. That, to me, is big government. So that's why I'm for immigration reform. So it was an incredible experience working with a president who, had a good heart, a good conservative. I think he did some things that I didn't like.
Habla español.
Un poquito. I didn't like No Child Left Behind.
Suficiente por presidente.
Yeah, I didn't like Prescription D. I didn't like No Child Left Behind. But, you know, I think now we're ready for new leadership. We need people like Rand Paul and Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio. I think we have to eliminate, 4 agencies: commerce, energy, education, and what's the fourth?
Is that a Rick Perry joke?
No. But no, I think Governor Perry would be a great president. I think, my ideal ticket would be something like Perry, Rubio. But we have to take back our country and be bold. I mean, we cannot elect a Republican that is just going to continue expanding the federal government.
Well, I could definitely agree with that. But I just don't see anything good coming out of this, and hopefully instead of just joining statehood and not being a territory, that they maybe could get to choose for themselves instead. That's one thing he kind of leaves out, that, well, as there might be a lot of individuals there that believe that maybe we should adopt some type of small government, but not be a part of the United States where we have to adhere to all their regulation. Well, they probably don't have a lobby group for succession of their territory from the United States. I'm almost guaranteeing that they don't. Do you think they have some organized group with a big booth at these Republican what they're going to do is, well, if there is a movement growing for maybe we shouldn't be a part of the United States, this Obamacare and all this other stuff that's affecting us, let's not do this anymore. We have the ability, because we're a territory, to try to claim our independence. Well, what's a good way to actually keep Puerto Rico under Obamacare? Become a part of the United States. And I think that's the difference between a lot of the other so-called Tea Partyists and Rand Paul, is Rand Paul actually, for once, kind of made me glad that he was actually wanting to give Puerto Rico and the people of Puerto Rico the decision, not lobby just for statehood. Give them the ability to say either we want to become a statehood or we want to become our own nation. Yeah, but the Constitution, that's why we need statehood. Well, if it was that type of government, then you could just adopt that same type of Constitution and split your Puerto Rico up into little territory things that, you know, your little state. Have your little statehoods and your little constitution that's based off of ours. That's why, well, when you see lobbyists like that, I guess that's what you should expect. So, and when it comes to talking about the border, which we talked about in past broadcasts, and how easy they get in, and well, if you got Ebola, you can also get in. This is from White Out Press. Tens of millions barred from leaving America. And this is something that I've warned about. I've warned. Go ahead, put up a wall, put up a fence, put up a brick wall, you know, to stop the illegals from coming in. There's also a problem with that, is it will also keep you in. I played the clip from Ron Paul that he warned of that. And it says here, August 6th, Los Angeles, ONN is America free country or an apartheid state. We are constantly told that unlike communist countries, which this kind of feeds into what the other guy was saying, you could leave America if you don't like it. Okay. We're constantly told that unlike communist countries, we have to build walls to keep people in. The U.S. has to build walls to keep people out. The shocking truth is tens of millions of Americans are prisoners in the U.S., unable to leave, and many for no legitimate reason at all. Your author is just one, but more and more are writing to us every day for help and let us know we're not alone. Some readers are familiar with your authors, and the author is, let me see if it even says, probably does at the bottom. I think it's Mikhail Sebastian. But it says here, some readers are familiar with the author's personal 20-year-long tragedy of daily persecution, prosecution, and theft for the crime of single-handedly raising my children. Denied any kind of child support because I am a father in an apartheid country. We've been forced to pay child support for more than 20 years to a deadbeat mother 1,000 miles away. Your author was surprised to find out a few years ago that the crime earned me the privilege of being imprisoned in the U.S., unable to ever leave the country. Mikhail Sebastian is a Los Angeles resident who... Oh, this is the person that I read, but let me see if I can find the author. Not sure. I don't see the author name, but says Michael Sebastian is a Los Angeles resident who's in a similar situation, and for the same 20-year time period, he's done everything the U.S. government and state governments has asked him. Just like your author, and also like your author, he found himself repeatedly jailed anyway. The author is one of the millions of American dads who are in prison in his own country, but Michael Sebastian is one of the 1,000 here in the U.S. considered stateless, ordered to leave but not allowed to do so. Coming to America, and let me see here. If they're trying to say that they're illegals or not. I think it doesn't say that they came here legally. But really getting down to it is you aren't free to leave. Well, if you don't like the laws, you could leave, go to another country. Okay, sell everything you own and try to leave the country. Oh, that won't work, will it? Will you be able to take your money out of the country? Again, that's why Bitcoins might play a part if you're going to a country where you know that they got the ability to cash your Bitcoins in. Again, there are pluses to Bitcoin that people forget about. But try to take it in dollar bill form. Or even credit cards. Or put it on a card and try to take it. Those go through the banks. They will start taking your money if you start trying to withdraw it all. And they probably won't let you. Bitcoins. You know, all these things that we talked about are showing really how oppressive we are as a nation. And the problem is on both sides of the aisle. The people that are running the game are not going to allow things to change towards more freedom. These people are hell-bent on power over others. And even that gentleman from Puerto Rico, wanting statehood, proved that. He believes that, well, there's different rights. No, there's rights and there's non-rights. And it's not that they have different rights that allows them to have rights that Americans don't. Says, well, they can't have the same rights as the individual. No, that's not true. It's not that they can't have the same rights. They cannot have rights that the individuals themselves don't have. So if you, as an individual, don't have the right to tell someone, give me 30% of your income, and when they go no, you can lock them in a cage and point guns at them. You can't say that, well, government has that right because it's a different right. No, it's not a right. collectives don't have that right to rule over others. And I really, really think that he was being confronted with his own beliefs to the point that he was trying to come up with almost anything to argue those points. And it comes back to, well, your arguments for government are what concrete government into existence for the ability to be corrupted. That when you legitimize or attempt to legitimize the government having rights that the people don't have, is, well, untrue. Because when you look at how the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, that wasn't a majority collective that decided we're going to, become our own country. That was a minority collective. And at one point, that was individuals that hadn't yet found each other, that had the same belief that I should be free. I should not be forced into this. I, not we. I. The individual should not be forced into this. But an attempt to keep their freedom, they unintentionally created the same beast that they left. It wasn't that way all the time, but even under George Washington, that beast appeared its head. The Whiskey Rebellion? Even when this country was first started, it was about having your freedom. That freedom was cut short. When you understand that we, by holding on to this concept that you can have a governing body, I like to look at it more from the word government and my own personal beliefs and, how I conceptualize what government is that, well, it means to govern the mind, to control the mind. I am an individual. I have free will. I have the ability to govern my mind. When I get angry, I don't automatically lash out on someone. I'm able to control my emotions. And I realize that I can handle things better when I do that. I realize that maybe I should look at the morals, the hypocrisy in myself. Thank you for tuning in, and I'll catch you this Friday. Take care and stay tuned here on UCY for all the great broadcasts.